Hello and welcome to the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. My name's Hugh Fullerton, and as I may have mentioned before, I'm the sci-fi and fantasy editor of radiotimes.com.
And I'm Helen Daly. I'm the assistant editor of radiotimes.com.
Your ears do not deceive you. Morgan Jeffrey, my faithful companion, I like to think, part of my TARDIS team, is unavailable this week. So Helen has very kindly stepped in, or Morgan's regenerated into Helen, depending on how you look at it. And she's come just in time because this is a very special edition. It's a very spooky episode of the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. Doctor Who, more like, because we're getting up to Halloween. And if there's one thing Doctor Who's known for, it's been a bit scary, compared to other TV shows. And so we had to think about a few things we could do to mark the occasion. And what we've actually done is we've been running a vote on radiotimes.com for what is the scariest monster of all time. What's got you hiding behind the sofa. And today we can reveal the results, which is very exciting. So we put it to fans. We had a short list of about 20 monsters from across Doctor Who history, some older ones like the Worm and some newer ones like the Drakes. And yeah, we basically got people to vote and we've got our top 10 and we'll reveal the winner during this podcast. So Helen, do you want to kick us off with number 10?
Yeah, so a surprising entry slipping into the top 10 from The Impossible Planet. It's the Beast, who got 2% of the vote.
Yes, so basically Satan doesn't even crack the top 5 in Doctor Who, which gives you
No, you give him that.
Top 10, yeah, you give him that. Yeah, so this episode was obviously the two-parter Impossible Planet Satan Pit, when the Doctor, David Tennant's Doctor, kind of tackles the devil on a sort of alien moon that's orbiting a black hole, which turned out to be a prison. I mean, I remember watching this episode so clearly because it was kind of in late spring, I think, and I remember I was around my friend's house at a barbecue, bizarrely. So I don't have that many scary associations with it because I was watching it. It was quite sunny outside, and we were just in there eating burgers, watching it. But I do think that clearly it's interesting that it's scored as high as it has. I mean, it's beaten out quite a lot of more recent monsters and some more classic monsters. I mean, I guess it's quite a spooky episode, and it is the devil. Do you reckon that's why it kind of attracted the attention it did?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I remember it fondly as, being quite a decent episode, quite fun. There was a lot of kind of action in it. So I wonder if that element has kind of pushed it up a little bit. Obviously, it was quite a scary monster. I remember it more for its questionable CGI at the time. But, it's Satan, it's the devil. It's always going to be quite scary, especially for some people. So I think, top 10, I think it's a bit surprising, but it's okay.
So that's a possible episode. If you're doing a Doctor Who Halloween watch this weekend, a possible one is the Impossible Planet / Satan Pit, where you'll see the Beast, where possibly the scariest thing will be, as Helen says, the VFX quality, but maybe not, maybe the episode itself. I mean, other things in that episode, we also had in our shortlist Possessed Ood, which didn't make it into the top 10, which I always found quite scary, with the red eyes and everything and the voice. So maybe that split the vote a little. Maybe we should have combined those together. I don't know. So that's the Beast at number 10. We're going to keep moving through these fairly quickly so that we don't hold you all here too long. Because number 9 and number 8, I'm actually controversially going to group together, because they're quite similar. So at number 9 in our shortlist of the scariest Doctor Who monsters are the Mondasian Cybermen. So specifically the kind of early versions that were in the 1960s and then returned in the 2017 series. And at number 8, just ahead of them, like a tiny, tiny difference in the votes, were just the regular old Cybermen. Now, I don't know about you, Helen, but I was quite surprised to see the Cybermen as low down as this.
Yeah, huge. For me, I think I would say, I'm going to say it now before we get to it later, I think they're scarier than the Daleks. I think the Cybermen have something really, really creepy about them. They have no emotions. They're just an army. They're an army of steel. And I think for them to score so low, especially when they're such a classic Doctor Who monster, I think is surprising. I wonder if, splitting them up into the two different species, as it were, has maybe split the vote. But 10% for the Cybermen as a race as a whole is not bad. Would put them a little bit higher up the list. I think 8 and 9 is still respectable, top 10, but I will always remember the Age of Steel, especially as being a fantastic episode for the Cybermen. And it really terrified me when I was younger. So I think that will definitely, remain in people's minds.
Definitely. I mean, I'm looking at it now. So I wasn't mentioning the percentages, but the Beast got 2%, and these both got 5%. The regular old Cybermen got slightly more votes to put them ahead. It is interesting because, yeah, you're right. If we put those two percentages together, they'd be in third, without spoiling what comes further up. So that is quite interesting. The reason that we did split them up is because, personally, this is kind of maybe my fault. I found the Mondasian Cybermen a lot scarier in that episode with, you know, the pain, all that stuff. They were so creepy. Like, I felt that was so horrible that I kind of was like, there's a kind of, the thing with the Cybermen that gets me is there's a real body horror element to them, a little like the Borg in Star Trek, where the scary bits of the Age of Steel for me are like when you realize there's a real person in there, or when you kind of see the, you know, people going into the conversion chambers and stuff like that. And I felt like it becoming so surgical with the Mondasian Cybermen, at least in the recent appearances, made them sort of creepier. Like, it's not just like, oh, here's a big robot. It's, oh, there's a person in here kind of pickled and, like, you know, chopped up and kind of like in constant agony. And I was like, oh, it's just so horrible. And
Yeah, for
similarly, you
me,
know, sorry.
so for me, that's when they get scarier, when you see that little bit of humanity. Like with the Daleks, there's no humanity there, there's nothing. But with the Cybermen, you might see a little oil tear here and there. You might, you know, you see them going into the conversion chambers and you can just picture their heads being cut off, essentially. It's terrifying, right? And it's the kind of spooky robot story that we've had for a long time that's always going to be terrifying, that robots are going to take over. And you genuinely think sometimes that the Cybermen will take over. And I think, yeah, when you see that humanity aspect of it, that's when they become actually really terrifying. And I think honestly they deserve to be a little bit higher up, personally. But like you say, you know, maybe it was splitting them, split the vote, but both equally scary in their own right. And I think a fantastic Doctor Who monster.
I mean, what did you think of, in the most recent series, obviously they came back, we had a Shad, the lone Cyberman, who was kind of had a little bit of that vibe because he was a bit human. He knew a bit, he recited a bit of poetry, which I quite liked. You know, and you could see bits of him. I mean, that was quite a scary episode, The Haunting of Villa Diodati, or Via Diodati, if that's how you're pronouncing it. I mean, what do you think of him? And, you know, was he a scary Cyberman?
I think when the Cybermen are backed into a corner, that's when they become most dangerous, because they're just going to start lashing out. They're incredibly powerful, right? They've got some serious tech on them. So when you back one into a corner, that's when he's going to start lashing out and start being quite dangerous. So I think it wasn't the kind of most prominent story that's going to live in people's minds, which, you know, could also have an effect on the scores that we're seeing today. But you know, a respectable story where you see a different side to the Cybermen, because you also run the risk of, how do you make the Cybermen different? How do you make the Daleks different? And by doing something like Via Diodati, that's exactly how you do it.
Perfect. All right, moving through the list, we've got number 7. I think now we're moving into the creepier monsters at this stage, because at number 7 we have the Silence. So obviously they were the kind of big baddies of the Stephen Moffat era, kind of. They sort of were very sort of subtly teased in the first series, and they just sort of turn up after that. Like, yeah, it was us who blew up the TARDIS, remember us? Or probably not. The thing with the Silence is they obviously had kind of a unique gimmick, which was the whole "you can't see them if you're not looking at them" thing, which is quite scary. Like the idea of like the way you seeing this sort of horrible creature and you look away and it's still there, it's still watching you, but you don't know it's there. You've completely forgotten. It's quite scary. But I think what made them creepy for me was just the design. Like they just had those horrible faces, the kind of big, they were a little bit based on kind of popular perceptions of aliens. They had the kind of Men in Black suits on, at least the first times we saw them. Again, they were tying into the kind of Roswell vibe that they were going for at the beginning of the series they first appeared in. But yeah, they were just so horrible looking. The way they sort of screamed, they were a bit of an Edvard Munch kind of thing as well, weren't they? I mean, you said, Helen, you know, just to kind of go behind the curtain a bit, that this was actually the monster that you voted for as the scariest. I feel like you must have some strong opinions here.
Yeah, I will out myself as a Silence fan, kind of. Yeah, I think they're the embodiment of Stephen Moffat's kind of creations. He always, as we will touch upon, I'm sure, later on, he always kind of hits the nail on the head when it's monsters that you can't see, but they're right in front of you. And I think that's what's always scary, whether it's dust, whether it's statues, or whether it's something that is behind you that you forget about as soon as you turn around. That is what's inherently scary, because that's the thing that's going to make you look over your shoulder at night. And I think the Silence were just, they were smart, they looked great. They had those suits on, which I thought were really chic. And I think they just turned out to be a fantastic monster that genuinely gave the Doctor a bit of a test, which sometimes we don't always see with the monsters.
Definitely. I remember there was that episode, I think it's not the Lodger, I can't remember which one it is. I think it's one of the astronaut ones where you see them all like on the ceiling and there's just this sea of like these little bobbing bald heads kind of turning around. And it's just, there's a real kind of grossness to them, which I think a lot of Doctor Who monsters are kind of quite kind of boxy or costumey sometimes, I think. And I think now these days that they have such good prosthetics and stuff, I think that there's a kind of extra level of kind of creepiness that you can get to. Speaking of that kind of makeup and things, though, the next monster is an interesting one. Number 6, Beating the Silence, we have the Flood. So this was a one-off monster that we met in the Waters of Mars, which is, I think, the closest Doctor Who's come to a kind of Halloween episode because it was a special on around that time. And I mean, I think we were both a little surprised to see the Flood as high as they were, because I remember when I saw this episode, I was a bit underwhelmed by the Flood. I didn't find the Flood are the kind of water zombies, essentially. I'm not sure if they were ever officially, I think they vaguely called themselves a Flood at one point, but it's one of those things where after the fact they decide what they're called. They're called the Flood. But yeah, at the time I was a little underwhelmed. I don't know, what about you?
Well, I mean, the name is fantastic. Like, blood. It's very dramatic, very Doctor Who. I think when I saw this list and started casting my mind back to when I watched The Waters of Mars, I remember it being quite creepy. I remember it being, a fun episode. There was a lot of drama. And I think their prosthetics probably did it on this one. They had the weird cracked mouth. They had water coming out of every orifice and just from the top of their head. Like, it was really cool, actually. It was really, really cool prosthetics. So I think perhaps it was the look a little bit more than the actual threat, because, David Tennant's Doctor just blew them all up and it was fine. Obviously prompting a different story arc there for him. But yeah, I think it's definitely the roguish choice, I would say, in the list. But I think I can understand it, because I think they do look really cool. And I think if we're looking at the rest of the list, like the Silence, they've still got that really, really creepy and horrible nightmarish look about them, just like the Flood.
I think the thing I had with them was at the time, there was a real sense of like, this is Russell T Davies obviously wrote this episode, and at the time everyone was saying Stephen Moffat writes the scariest episodes. Oh yeah, the scary one's always Stephen Moffat. And I remember the Radio Times magazine wrote this whole piece basically asking him about that, and him saying, "Oh, I'm going to do a scary episode for you." And it felt a little like, I felt like it was very much trying to kind of create these new kind of scary monsters and didn't quite land it. Weirdly, the thing that always comes back to is I remember watching Doctor Who Confidential or something like that, and they explained about how the monsters run. So in the episode, they do a lot of running, and they run kind of like, I'm miming, so you guys can't see this listening, but they kind of do this kind of, I don't know, like Olympian run with the hands, going up before, or a bit like, the $6 Million Man or whatever it is. And I kind of thought it looked a bit daft, and they wanted it to be, they didn't want them to be slow, because that's kind of been done with zombies and stuff like that, and they didn't want them to be too wild. But the thing that would have been scarier for me, I think, is if they'd been a little bit more ungainly, a little bit sort of, well, wilder, I suppose, kind of more like the scarecrows from Family of Blood or something. The way that they move is so unusual, and the fact that they just sort of ran like, little sprinters, I just thought it looked a bit daft. I thought they were scarier kind of close by, and when they were kind of, I mean, the faces of them, these sort of big grins they've got, were very, very horrible. And then when you actually just see them sort of going for a jog, it's not quite the same sense of menace.
Yeah, and the premise was that the water was going to get you, right? So I think just having the shots of the water kind of dripping along very slowly, getting to the team, I think that was actually a lot creepier than the kind of autumn weird water zombies, as you say. So I think, yeah, they didn't need them necessarily. But at least they did look good. But yeah, I thought the menace of that episode was actually just the water, which you can see, why kind of Russell T Davies went on that, the kind of, as we talked about, the normal thing in your household that's going to get you. Yeah, I think they looked okay. They looked okay for me.
It's funny you mentioned that kind of unfeeling, unhuman, creeping force, because number 5 on the list kind of very much fills that as well, which is the Vashta Nerada, which is basically the hungry shadows, is probably the best way of describing them. And they turn up in Silence in the Library / Forest of the Dead, trying to remember the titles there, which was obviously the big River Song episode, the first time River Song turned up, which is kind of what those episodes are remembered for. But it's really interesting that Vashta Nerada, they've not been on, for 12 years or whatever, and they were in just one double episode, and still they're kind of, people remember them and are quite scared of them. I mean, there's this great, obviously the premise of them is that they are kind of creatures that live in the shadows and they eat flesh. So you throw a chicken bone in there, they just rip it raw. And then in the episode, they kind of end up taking a more physical form, which is handy for A, budget, and B, kind of menace, when they eat a guy and then he's just this skull in a spacesuit, which I think that's the image we used in the poll. And I think that's become quite an iconic Doctor Who image, this skull kind of slightly leaning forward in the spacesuit. I mean, everyone's afraid of the dark, right? And that's the premise of the episode. That feels like the kind of pinnacle of Doctor Who, that thing you think is a bit creepy. There's actually a reason why. Being afraid of the dark is classic. And then basically the Doctor saying there's a reason that people were afraid of the dark works really well. I mean, what do you think about the Vashta Nerada? I love the scenes where they're running along and then like the lights are kind of going out and the shadows are just kind of lengthening towards them.
I remember very, very vividly when Silence in the Library first came on, I went over and turned the light on. So I think for me, that's a scary monster. Like you say, everyone's got that little fear of the dark. And I think I remember it looking amazing, the fact that these shadows would grow. And it was just a really, really clever idea that, didn't have to be necessarily high budget. It was really smart. And yes, obviously the episode is more remembered for River Song. Yes, she is my favorite pilot of all time. But I think it was a really smart idea to have a monster that quite literally lived in the background, so you could see River and the Doctor interact for the first time. So I think a really, really smart move, and I'm really glad to see them coming in at 5th place, definitely.
Definitely. Just ahead of them, so Vashta Nerada were on 6% of the vote. Just ahead of them on 7% of the vote is another Stephen Moffat creation. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. Which I've got here is the gas mask zombies, but possibly better known as the empty child. Like, Mummy.
Stop it.
Are you my mummy? God. I remember I watched that on my own on some evening. I think because I was watching it, they used to do repeats on BBC Three the day after. I think I missed it on Saturday. So I watched it like the day after it came out. And I was watching it alone in the evening, and it was genuinely really scary. I mean, the thing with Doctor Who is sometimes it's scary, but you kind of appreciate it kind of almost, I don't know, empirically, like, oh yeah, I see that scary, that's a bit creepy, ooh, a bit of a shudder. This one, I was genuinely quite creeped out by this little wandering child with the gas mask and the sing-song voice. And I think it is one of the episodes that people throw back to. And it's funny because it's so early in the run of, new Doctor Who that turns up, but it's become such an iconic thing in the show. I mean, you seemed a bit spooked out by me doing it there. Is that a scary episode for you?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think there's so many levels to it because obviously, one, there's a little boy who's walking around by himself. That's inherently scary. 2, he's got a gas mask on. 3, he's got a bit of a weird, creepy voice. I think the bit for me was when you saw the mask kind of melting onto the skin, and it was horrible. And you saw, who was the guy who played it? You saw
Victor Meldrew.
Victor Meldrew. Yeah, that's all I could think of. I was like, who's the actor? When you saw him kind of transform and the kind of mask come out of his mouth and wrap around his face, it was awful. It was really visceral, and actually probably one of the more, I don't want to say violent, but one of the more gruesome Doctor Who episodes that there's been. And like you say, it came really early on and kind of set a precedent, especially for Stephen Moffat and his kind of creation. So yeah, I think it definitely a fantastic monster, and weirdly apt in 2020 to have
That's true. The masks. I mean, a lot of Doctor Who wants to have masks, but not canonically. So that's one of the canonical mask wearing ones. That is Richard Wilson, incidentally, was the actor we were searching for, who I actually met, so I probably should know his name. But yeah, no, the thing where his mouth sort of opens and his eyes get all glassy. I mean, the thing that's also nice about that episode, weirdly, is the next episode, The Doctor Dances, I don't find scary at all, because that one's all about them kind of fixing it. And then everybody lives, famously. It's all fixed. And, I think that's what maybe makes that a great Doctor Who story, is that it's really scary, but it has that kind of life-affirming, but it'll all be okay moment, like if the Doctor fixes it, everything's okay again. I think that's kind of what makes it great. Although there's a bit of me that, I remember being at the time surprised by how unscary I found the next one, considering how creepy I thought The Empty Child was. I did think that one could have won the whole thing. I mean, it really didn't, but I did, wonder whether it would. Instead, there's actually 3 ahead of it. So the next one at number 3, which like gas mask zombies, got 7% of the vote, but got slightly more votes, is what I've got here is the Midnight Creature. I think people have also called it the Midnight Entity. The thing is, it doesn't really have a name. So this is a Russell T Davies creation. This was the unseen force, which was haunting the characters in Midnight, which is an episode from 2008. So this is one of the, it wasn't a Dr. Light episode, which was a thing where for filming this, I filmed 2 episodes back to back. This was a companion light episode. So Catherine Tate as Donna is barely in it. It's basically the Doctor on a bus. There were a couple of episodes of the Doctor on a bus, actually, for budgetary reasons. But no, it's basically David Tennant kind of locked in this space bus with people, and it goes a bit, well, not quite Murder on the Orient Express, but it goes a bit maybe more like Alive. People start turning on each other. There's a mystery. What's this creature, and why is it infecting people? And it's one of the most effective monsters, I think, because you never see it. It's not quite like the Vashta Nerada where it's off in the shadows and you see the shadows. Like, you never see anything. It's just you hear a knocking, the lights go out, and then one person there seems to have been taken over by it. I mean, what do you think of Midnight? And do you think that, this creature, which we never even see for all of Doctor Who's great creature design, do you think it deserves its place so high in our ranking?
It's like what I said before, when you have a monster in Doctor Who that isn't necessarily there or is kind of playing on your fears, that, aren't the dark or aren't, whatever, they're statues, they're the ability of you being able to speak properly. I think Midnight worked really well. I instantly was surprised when I saw Midnight scoring so highly, coming in at 3rd. But then when I cast my mind back to the episode, and I remembered very vividly that moment that David Tennant was kind of talking to the person who had the Midnight Creature within her, and all of a sudden it flipped, and you could see when the monster jumped over to him, and it was very subtle. And I thought, actually, it was more a kind of acting test than anything else. It was a fantastic showcase of David Tennant's abilities, but a scary monster because, like you say, you've got the banging outside, you don't know what it is. All of a sudden there's people acting a bit weirdly, they've been taken over, they've been possessed. It's kind of a ghost story, right?
Definitely.
And I think it will always be scary because you still, to this day, don't know what it is. It doesn't even have a name. We can't explain it. It's a thing.
Yeah, I mean, we should also say Leslie Sharp, who played Sky Silvestri, who's the kind of host of The Creature, matches David Tennant line for line, pretty much, literally. I mean, they're there saying the exact same thing, the exact same time. And I think, I watched some videos of how they did that, and it was just loads of practice, essentially. But no, you're totally right. I think that what makes that monster scary is that we never really know what it is. We never even, know exactly what it wanted or what it was doing. The other argument as well, though, is that the monsters in Midnight are the passengers, because, that's the whole thing, is the breakdown where essentially they kind of elect to kill the Doctor or they elect to kill someone else, and they get so afraid and they all turn on each other. And, which obviously that cast includes the son of a Doctor, one of Patrick Troughton's sons is in the episode, and also a future wizard, because Colin Morgan, who was to become Merlin, was in the episode as Jethro. So, yeah, I think that the fact that, that must have been such an acting challenge, probably more so than a lot of Doctor Who episodes. It's very confined. It's more like a play, a bit of a bottle episode. I think that all the cast do really well, considering that they're not actually reacting to a real monster. I mean, I guess arguably in Doctor Who they never are. But yeah, I think I can definitely see why it did as well it did. I'm pleasantly surprised, actually, but it's as high as it is, because, things like the gas mask zombies or the Vashta Nerada or whatever, I remember these. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a scary Doctor Who episode. People remember that. Da, da, da. The fact that the creature from Midnight still scares people now, only appears in one episode, is kind of very low key. I think that's, really cool. And I think that's kind of the best kind of Doctor Who monster, the ones where it's subtle. I mean, the next monster, number 2 on our list, can't be accused of subtlety though. So this possibly won't surprise anybody, but 13%, so a bit of a jump. At number 2, we have the Daleks. Yes, so the Doctor's greatest foe only made it to number 2 of the scariest Doctor Who monsters. Crazy times. Obviously, I think the Daleks are the oldest monsters on this list. We did have some classic monsters apart from them and the Mondasian Cybermen on the list, but I guess absence makes things less scary. The Daleks have been around pretty consistently throughout Doctor Who, and I was quite, I thought they'd do quite well, but they're the original let's hide behind the sofa from the Daleks. People have been scared of them for decades. But also, you know, it's easy to think other Daleks going to be a bit of a joke to people now. They're so familiar. You know, they're like the Aston Martin or something. They're a design. They're a, you know, a British kind of icon. You've seen the jokes. Can they get upstairs? We know they can fly now. You know, they're in Doctor Who so often. There's an episode where they're just sort of pushed around by people because their wheels aren't working. You know, the fact that they still do so well on this list, I think there's a bit of a cultural memory of the Daleks are scary. But also, you know, I think the show does keep finding new ways to make them scary. I mean, what do you think, Helen? Are the Daleks scary?
Yeah, I think if you say Doctor Who monster, you say Dalek. It's probably the ultimate kind of quiz question. You won't be scoring no points on pointless for it. I think, you know, I think with the Daleks, there is definitely a cultural memory. If I spoke to my parents now and asked them what they were most scared of when they were younger watching TV, they'd say the Daleks. And I think, you know, quite right. I think, like we said with Midnight, you know, it was subtle. It was, you know, nuanced. It was quite scary. The Daleks are scary because of scale. They never ever have kind of half-hearted Dalek episodes. It's always, here's an army, now beat this army.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, maybe they are starting to lose their kind of impact now. They're second, they're not number one. Maybe that's because we know that the Doctor's always going to beat the Daleks. Is there a time that the Doctor hasn't beaten the Daleks? It's always going to happen. So I think, you know, maybe they've been overused a little bit. They need to be parked up. Arguably like the Cybermen, but I think you know, they're iconic, and it would be a shame if they weren't on the list. So I think second place is fantastic for them, and I think they will forever be known as the Doctor Who monster.
Definitely. I mean, the thing you say there about the familiarity is definitely a point, which is why I was so surprised the Cybermen were as far down as they were, because I felt like people would be like, oh yeah, scary monsters. Oh yeah, I'm scared of a Cyberman, I'm scared of a Daleks or whatever. The fact that so many other ones went ahead of a Cybermen is interesting, but also the fact that the Daleks did still keep that point, that high position, despite the familiarity of them. I mean, I was thinking about episodes of Daleks where I've been, you know, scared by them. Obviously, there's lots of early appearances when they're quite creepy and stuff. And I was thinking of Dalek in 2005 more recently, where they kind of just emphasize the power of a single Dalek, which is a really, really, you know, great way of doing it. And then even more recently, you know, thinking of things like, I guess I was thinking a little bit of Resolution, where they have, obviously they're the kind of tinpot Dalek, but actually I quite liked the Dalek mutants, you know, the squid thing essentially being such a big part of that episode and kind of taking over Charlotte Ritchie's body, and that kind of, again, that body horror element, which we don't get very often with Daleks. I felt like that was quite effective for making them quite creepy. Obviously, there's one time when we don't know whether the Doctor will beat the Daleks or not, which is the upcoming festive special. I have a suspicion that she might.
I think she might overcome the Daleks just at this one time at Christmas.
Yeah, but no, I mean, you know, it's nice that, you know, people can still get scared by something that's been around for such a long time. I mean, like I say, people are still hiding behind their sofas from the Daleks, and, you know, I think that's kind of great. That's quintessential Doctor Who. But we should probably look at the monsters that have defeated the Daleks. No, I don't mean the mechanoids, for regular listeners. A little mechanoid joke for you. No, there's actually a monster which came first, where hiding behind the sofa is probably the worst thing you could do, because you wouldn't be looking at them. That is, of course, the Weeping Angels. So yeah, the Weeping Angels won the poll. I mean, it's not very surprising. When you think of the other monsters in the list, I mean, you never know, anything could have beaten them, but the Weeping Angels are probably the thing where, if you ask for a scary Doctor Who monster, that's immediately where people's mind goes to. Like, empirically, I've used empirically wrong twice, I think, but probably the Daleks are sometimes scary, sometimes not. Same with other ones. Sometimes they're one-offs. The Weeping Angels are always intended to be scary. That's their thing. They're creepy, they're threatening. We actually, when we talked about this in a meeting, our colleague Michael said, I don't watch Doctor Who, and I'm scared of the Weeping Angels. And I think that's kind of the thing with them. So obviously they first turned up in Blink in 2007, which was a Stephen Moffat episode. Probably, that's actually previously won. We've run a few What's the Best Episode Ever polls, and Blink has won those a few times. Also won the Scariest episode a few years ago. So, you know, kind of ties in. And yeah, the Weeping Angels, obviously, they're quantum locked. So they're statues while you're looking at them, but you look away and then they move. I mean, I personally don't think they've ever been better than in the very first episode they were in, because Blink is so scary. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, we were talking before the podcast, and I revealed that I've only ever been able to watch Blink once, and that was a very scary one. So I was genuinely hiding behind my eyes. I think, the thing with Blink is that with every other, with the Weeping Angels, with every other monster on that list, to an extent, you kind of know how you would approach it. You know how you would kind of tackle it. If it was a Cyberman, you'd go for the neural inhibitor. If it was, I don't know, the Vashta Nerada, you'd turn the light on. So I think, there's ways that you can picture yourself kind of overcoming them. The Weeping Angels, not a clue. They're completely surrounding you. Literally, if you blink, they'll get you. And I think that's a really terrifying concept. And I think Stephen Moffat really nailed something with them. And I remember actually going out after Blink and the next day and just noticing how many statues were around.
Well, they have that evil bit at the end of the episode where they just show loads of statues and say like, oh yeah, these are probably Weeping Angels. And the thing is, they're all in Cardiff because Doctor Who films in Cardiff, and I lived in Cardiff at the time, so I knew that I walked by those statues all the time, often at night. I was like, I can't swear, but how could you do that? I mean, like, I just walking along Queen Street being like, oh God, there's that creepy little child. All right, there's the miner. I mean, I don't think the miner would hurt me, but yeah, no, it's definitely one of those. It's one of those fears I didn't even know I had until I watched Doctor Who. I mean, the Weeping Angels obviously came back in 2010 for Time of Angels, Flesh and Stone, when they're sort of a huge threat, and you see them move, which I think kind of ruined it a little. Seeing the angels move, they also really built up the lore, LORE lore of the angels in this episode, where you kind of, the image of an angel becomes an angel, all that stuff. And I kind of like that, but I kind of like the simplicity in Blink. That said, there's that bit at the end of the first part of that two-part story where they realise that they're in like the labyrinth of statues, and every statue, which are all very half-formed, are actually angels, just like without the wings and stuff. And they start turning around and looking at them, when they turn the lights off. That's brilliant. That's really cool and creepy. And then when they brought them back for the the Angels Take Manhattan, bizarre episode title. There are some bits in that episode I don't like. I don't like the giant Statue of Liberty. I think that's incredibly stupid. How did nobody see that when it crossed New York? But whatever. How was no one looking at that? But the thing I thought was quite interesting about them as well is they don't kill you. They just zap you back in time, and you just live out the rest of your days, and then they feed off the energy you leave behind. In their subsequent appearance with Matt Smith's Doctor and Alex Kingston, they started just killing people, which I thought was a bit boring. They just snapped people's necks because they had a bigger prize. In this one, Stephen Moffat managed to turn the zapping people back in time thing into something really horrible. It's where they're being zapped back in time over and over again, but just stuck in this like one room. Essentially, they just have to live. People have to live in this room for all eternity, aging as time just continues and runs over and over again. And I thought that was horrible. It was like battery farming, essentially. And there was just something really nasty about that. And I kind of liked that, I kind of thought that's a good way of looking at the angels. I mean, what about you? I mean, they've sort of cameoed a few times as well and other things, but I don't know. What do you think about I guess what I'm talking about is the additions to the angels, the extra rules and stuff.
I think there's so much possibility with them that means they actually have a really long shelf life. You mentioned the Time of Angels, Flesh and Stone. I think there was a fantastic moment in that when Amy Pond couldn't see. Now, if you can't see, how are you going to kind of not draw the attention of the angels? Well, you have to walk like an angel. You have to be an angel. And I thought, all the way through that sequence, I was just covering my eyes, just like, is she going to get through? It's real jeopardy. Then again, in The Angels Take Manhattan, you think Rory and Amy are completely safe. And then all of a sudden, there's another one. Like, they could be anywhere. And I think there's a real jeopardy there that isn't necessarily there with the Daleks. You kind of know that once they've all gone, they're all gone now, and then they'll all come back again at some point because there was some loop in the system. But I think with the Weeping Angels, have you ever really defeated them? Probably not.
They've sort of avoided them or gotten rid of them occasionally, but yeah, I think there's also something creepy about just their blank eyes, and they're so though they are human shit, they feel so unhuman in a way. Like the Daleks, as much as they are obviously aliens, their goals are very traditional, destroy other life, we want to rule the galaxy kind of stuff. Similar with the Cybermen, like sometimes it's a kind of racial purity thing, but there's parallels with that in human endeavors, I suppose. But with the Weeping Angels, what they want to do is so specific. They're just coming for you. That's all they want. All they want is to get you, essentially, for whatever reason. And that's really horrible. I mean, I talked to you about this before, but I played the Doctor Who VR game, Edge of Time. And the kind of big moment in that is you're in these corridors, and there's these two corridors, and there are angels coming down them, and basically the lights keep flickering, and if you look away, they run up and get you, and they do the noise. They're like, bah, you know. It's really interesting because I had to review that, and I've struggled because it was very well done, but it was really unpleasant. Like just sort of standing there, because they made me stand as well, because apparently that was more immersive. And I basically, you have to try and fix this like lift which is broken while the angels are like slowly coming for you. And I eventually kind of worked out there was a pattern to it, and you kind of, but they would occasionally, you'd be watching one and then there'd be a noise over here and you turn, it'd just be like a pram moving, and then you'd look back and that one would move forward. Like,
Awful.
yeah. Oh, there's a bit where one comes out of a painting and tries to grab you, and it's just, oh god, I'm actually slightly freaking myself out just remembering it. It's getting dark now, you know. It's, you know, I haven't got any statues in here. I do actually have a weeping angel though. I've got a little weeping angel wind-up toy that someone got me, which is, I'm not making this up. It's normally over there, but it's actually not. So that's that's a bit disturbing.
If an angel becomes an angel, you have one.
That's true. I'm sure I'll find it later. Anyway, no, I think that there's something really great about them. It's interesting we mentioned that, you say they've got a lot of potential, because the last time we saw them, they were in the Doctor Who spin-off Class, which was obviously didn't go past the first series. And at the end of that series, the big twist was, oh my God, the angels are actually the bad guys of this series, the Weeping Angels. So we've got this cool time Doctor Who. And then obviously Class was cancelled, so never got to see that. And actually, that's the last on-screen appearance of the Weeping Angels, because that was at the end of 2016. Doctor Who wasn't on that year. They weren't in the series after that. I mean, I think they briefly popped up that was before. In 2015, they were in Hellbent, but that was obviously before that. So obviously, if they're a Stephen Moffat creation, and maybe, subsequent showrunners like Chris Chibnall wouldn't necessarily want to bring them back because they're so associated with that one showrunner. But, for all the talk of, Chris Chibnall's bringing back the Daleks, Chris Chibnall's bringing back the Master, they've been in it more recently than the Weeping Angels. The Weeping Angels, actually, I was surprised by how little they have been in the series. There've been a few cameos and things, like in Time of the Doctor, but they've actually really just been in those 4 episodes as the main monster. And it's crazy what an impact they've had with those short appearances. I mean, would you like to see them again? Would you like to see Jodie Whittaker, maybe in the current team, take on the Weeping Angels?
Yeah, definitely. And kind of all future incarnations, or any of future incarnations of the Doctor, I think it's fantastic to see how different Doctors react to different monsters. So every different Doctor has a different Dalek experience, and that's really exciting. And I think the Weeping Angels are obviously fastly becoming one of those classic Doctor Who monsters that I think it would be a real shame not to see them back on screen again, and see, what other writers can do with them. Because obviously I'm sure Chris Chibnall could bring a completely different side to the Weeping Angels, and so on and so on. So I think I would like to see them again. I think they're a really clever Doctor Who monster that, will always provide good value. However, I would like some warning so I can just hide before it comes on. So I think, I think I would like to see them again. And I think our poll has proved, immensely, they won by a huge amount. So I think they are well loved and well liked, and I think well feared, quite rightly.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, I should say, I didn't actually say the score, but the Weeping Angels had 35% of the votes. That's 22% more than number 2, which was the Daleks. So it's an incredibly large margin. I should also say, though, Weeping Angels, probably the one monster that would be a very bad idea to hide from, because you need to be looking at them. They can just be moving around looking for you easily at the speed of light,
I can't see it isn't happening. So that's
and if you at home do want to see the Weeping Angels again, there is some good news. There is a Doctor Who online watch along of Blink this Halloween on Saturday, the 31st of October. This is in 2020, so if you're in the future, don't try and find this to avoid disappointment. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what the details are, but it's Emily Cook, who's done these watch-alongs before, has organised it. So if you go on her Twitter account, you should find the details. And yeah, I think people are watching along with the episode and tweeting and so on Saturday evening. So, tweet from behind your sofa, Helen. This could be your chance to watch Blink for the second time, see if it's as scary as you remember.
It's probably worse, because I probably built it up in my head as being this absolutely terrifying ordeal that I just won't be able to sit through.
Or maybe it won't be that scary. Maybe now you'll be like, well, what was I even worried about?
Yeah, vote for the silence again.
But listen, what do you at home think? Did we get the right top 10? Should a different Doctor Who monster have taken the top spot over the Weeping Angels? And if you are terrified of the Weeping Angels, just like we are, would you like to see them again? And what kind of story would you like to see them in? We've got more details of this poll on radiotimes.com, and how the voting broke down and everything. You can see the full list. And we should have some more spooky Doctor Who content as we get closer to Halloween. Until then, I've been Hugh Fullerton.
I've been Helen Daly.
And this has been the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. Goodbye.